You've probably noticed something quietly unsettling as you move through life. It's not that people are difficult to understand. It's that they're inconsistent. Someone says they care, yet their actions gradually drift away. Someone promises loyalty, yet vanishes the moment things become inconvenient. Someone smiles, agrees, reassures you, and later behaves as if none of it ever happened. And the most painful part isn't the betrayal itself. It's the moment you realize you never saw it coming. Most people move through life believing they genuinely understand others. They listen to words. They trust explanations. They assume good intentions. And again, they're caught completely off guard. Not because they're naive, not because they're lacking strength, but because no one ever taught them how human behavior actually operates beneath the surface. This audiobook exists for that precise reason, because human beings rarely disclose who they truly are in a direct, obvious way. They reveal themselves indirectly, through patterns, reactions, silence, timing, and the way they respond when the pressure of life arrives without warning. The truth is simple, but deeply uncomfortable. Words are frequently performances. Behavior is rarely accidental. People say what sounds appropriate. They say what shields their image. They say what keeps their options available. But behavior, consistent, repeated behavior, leaks the truth. You can sense sincerity in someone's tone, but you can witness it in their consistency. You can believe explanations, but you can only genuinely trust repetition. And once you absorb this understanding, something fundamental shifts within you. You stop overthinking conversations. You stop replaying moments in your mind, wondering what you overlooked. You stop criticizing yourself for not being more perceptive. Because real intuition isn't mystical. It's trained observation applied steadily over time. This audiobook is not about manipulation. It's not about control. And it's certainly not about becoming emotionally cold or withdrawn from life. It's about clarity. It's about developing the capacity to observe without projecting your own values onto others. To listen without absorbing their emotional state as your own. To see people as they genuinely are, not as you hope they might become. Most misunderstandings don't originate from malice. They emerge from assumption. You assume others think the way you think. You assume their values mirror your own. You assume honesty is a universal standard. But human behavior doesn't operate on assumptions. It operates on incentives, emotions, fears, and unconscious habits accumulated over a lifetime. And the sooner you truly recognize that, the safer and more composed you naturally become. There is a quiet, steady power in genuinely understanding people. When you can read behavior with accuracy, you no longer require constant reassurance from the outside world. When you can recognize emotional patterns before they escalate, you stop chasing clarity that was never going to arrive through conversation. When you begin noticing reactions rather than fixating on words, confusion gradually loses its hold on you. You stop asking, "Why did they do that?" and start saying, "Of course they did." Not with bitterness, with awareness. This audiobook will guide you through the concealed mechanics behind how people think, protect themselves, and reveal themselves, often without any conscious awareness that they are doing so. You'll understand why emotional reactions carry more honesty than carefully constructed explanations, why silence frequently communicates more than speech ever could, why pressure exposes genuine character far more rapidly than comfort, and why the calm, steady observer always perceives more than the reactive participant ever will. You'll also confront something deeper and more personal. The reason we misjudge people isn't solely because of them. It's because of us. We project our own internal world onto others. We fill in the gaps with our personal values. We interpret behavior through the lens of hope. And once you become genuinely aware of that tendency within yourself, you gain something uncommon: the capacity to step back, to observe instead of react, to understand instead of personalize, and to consistently choose clarity over confusion. As you engage with this material, don't rush through it. Allow the patterns to settle in your mind. Let the examples connect to real moments you've lived through. This isn't information designed to impress you with complexity. It's insight crafted to protect you and expand what you're capable of seeing. By the time you've absorbed everything shared here, you won't view people as simply good or bad, trustworthy or untrustworthy. You'll begin to see them as predictable. And when behavior becomes genuinely predictable, emotional chaos loses its power over you. You don't need to control people. You don't need to confront everyone who reveals their limitations. You don't need to explain yourself endlessly to those who weren't listening in the first place. You simply need to see clearly. And clarity, quiet, steady, unshakable clarity, is precisely where real power begins. Most people sincerely believe they are being themselves. They believe their personality is authentic, their opinions are original, and their behavior genuinely reflects who they truly are. But if you slow down and observe carefully, without judgment, without emotional interference, you begin to notice something deeply uncomfortable. People are not simply being, they are performing. From the earliest stages of childhood, human beings absorb a quiet but powerful lesson that shapes nearly every interaction they will ever have. Acceptance is conditional. Approval must be earned. Belonging requires continuous adjustment. So people adapt. They monitor reactions. They test behaviors. They gradually learn what earns reward and what invites rejection. Over time, these small adjustments stop feeling temporary. They solidify into habits, and eventually, habit becomes identity. What you frequently encounter is not the person as they genuinely are, but the role they have come to believe they must play in order to be accepted. Every social environment reinforces something different. In professional settings, confidence is praised, even when it's entirely hollow. In relationships, agreeableness is valued, even when it's fundamentally dishonest. In social circles, humor, dominance, or charm become the currencies people trade in. So people construct masks. They speak differently depending on who is present in the room. They soften opinions, amplify achievements, conceal doubts. They adjust tone, posture, and expression to suit the environment. This isn't manipulation in the calculated sense.
It's survival. Human beings are deeply social creatures, and social systems consistently penalize authenticity when it threatens harmony or disrupts established status. So most people choose safety over truth. They choose fitting in over standing apart. They choose being liked over being genuinely known. The problem isn't that people wear masks. The problem is forgetting that the mask is not the face beneath it. When someone tells you who they are most often telling you who they wish to be perceived as. Words are deliberate. Words are filtered. Words are consciously designed. People explain themselves in ways that protect their self-image. They describe their intentions, not their patterns. They construct stories that justify their behavior, rather than honestly reveal it. This is precisely why relying on words alone consistently leads to confusion and disappointment. Someone insists they value honesty, yet systematically avoids any conversation that might be uncomfortable. Someone declares loyalty, yet disappears entirely when circumstances become demanding. Someone repeatedly claims to care, yet their behavior quietly drifts further away with each passing week. These contradictions don't indicate that people are fundamentally dishonest or malicious. They reveal that people are inconsistent, particularly when their self-image is under pressure. Behavior, on the other hand, is far more difficult to sustain as a fabrication over time. Behavior is the unconscious confession. It leaks truth in small, repeated, consistent ways. How someone responds when they don't receive what they expected. How they conduct themselves when no one they're trying to impress is watching. How they treat people who can offer them absolutely nothing in return. These moments require no speeches, no rehearsed explanations, no elaborate justification. They are automatic expressions of who someone actually is. While words originate from conscious intention, behavior emerges from deep conditioning. It reveals what a person defaults to when they are no longer actively managing them.
Impression they make. This is why the most experienced and perceptive observers rarely ask, "What did they say?" They ask, "What did they consistently do, and how often did they do it?" Many people genuinely prefer the performance. Accepting behavior at face value feels kinder than questioning underlying motives. Believing the role someone plays is comforting because it allows hope, sustains optimism, and helps avoid uncomfortable conclusions. But this comfort carries a significant cost. When you choose to trust the role rather than observe the actual pattern, you consistently misjudge character. You excuse inconsistencies. You rationalize signals that deserved serious attention. You interpret clear, repeated patterns as isolated misunderstandings. And then, when reality eventually breaks through the comfortable illusion, the awakening feels sudden, even though the truth was forming quietly and persistently the entire time. Understanding that most people are performing is not about developing cynicism. It's about developing accuracy. Observing performance does not require judgment or confrontation. You don't need to accuse anyone. You don't need to withdraw emotionally from life. You simply need to watch with patient, steady attention. Watch what changes when pressure arrives. Watch what remains genuinely consistent across different situations and contexts. Watch how someone behaves when they lose control of the narrative they've been carefully maintaining. Real character surfaces when performance becomes too difficult and too exhausting to sustain. This quality of observation produces internal calm. You stop chasing clarity through endless conversation. You stop demanding explanations that were never going to satisfy you. You let behavior speak at its natural, unfiltered volume. And when you consistently do this, something quietly shifts within you. You become less reactive, less surprised, less emotionally pulled in directions that serve no one. Most people are exhausted by the persistent experience of misunderstanding others. They replay conversations in their minds long after they've ended. They analyze tone and word choice for hidden meaning. They question their own judgment and perception. But the underlying issue is rarely a lack of intelligence or emotional sensitivity. It is misplaced attention. Once you redirect your focus from words to consistent behavior, confusion begins to lose its grip on you entirely. You stop attempting to decode personalities through conversation alone. You allow time and repetition to reveal what speech has always tried to conceal. This doesn't create emotional distance. It creates groundedness. You learn to engage without illusion, to connect without deceiving yourself about what you're connecting with, to trust careful observation over the persistent pull of hope. And in a world saturated with performance and carefully managed impressions, that quality of awareness is genuinely rare. Because while most people are busy performing their chosen roles, the calm, patient observer is quietly developing understanding. And understanding, clear, steady, unencumbered by emotional reaction, is the foundation of reading people without being controlled or confused by them. Before we continue, take a moment to reflect on what's already shifting in your thinking. The observers throughout history, the thinkers who built genuine wisdom about human nature, understood something that most people overlook entirely. If what you've absorbed so far feels like it's connecting to something real inside you, consider leaving 111 in the comments. In many frameworks of consciousness and awareness, 111 represents the moment a new pattern of thought begins to activate. It signals alignment, the beginning of seeing something you couldn't see before. If that's happening for you right now, let this community witness that moment. Words are constructed with care and deliberate intention. Behavior is not. This distinction is one of the most consequential truths you can internalize if your goal is to read people with genuine accuracy. Human beings speak intentionally. They filter what they say, often without conscious awareness, through layers of fear, desire, self-image, and the constant need for protection. Behavior, however, emerges from habit. It surfaces when deliberate thinking recedes and instinct naturally takes over. That's precisely why behavior consistently reveals what words work. So hard to conceal. When someone tells you who they are presenting a carefully constructed narrative. When someone shows you who they are through consistent behavior, they are revealing a pattern. And patterns, when observed without emotional distortion, do not mislead. Most people assume honesty lives in language. They listen intently to explanations, promises, apologies, and reasons. They believe clarity emerges from thorough conversation. But human psychology operates very differently from that comfortable assumption. The mind possesses a remarkable capacity for justifying behavior after it has already occurred. Words are frequently employed to explain away discomfort, not to genuinely reveal truth. Behavior does not explain itself with words. It simply repeats. A person may sincerely claim they are overwhelmed and unavailable, yet consistently find time and energy for every activity that genuinely matters to them. A person may assert with conviction that they care, yet repeatedly delay any meaningful action that would demonstrate it. A person may declare loyalty with complete apparent sincerity, yet become absent the moment circumstances shift unfavorably. None of these contradictions require complex interpretation or psychological analysis. They simply require patient, unbiased observation over sufficient time. The most revealing territory in human behavior is the gap between what someone says and what they consistently do. This gap is never entirely accidental. It forms when intention collides with reality. When self-image clashes with deeply ingrained habit. When the desire to be seen a certain way meets the discomfort of actually behaving that way. People speak from the version of themselves they aspire to be. They act from the version of themselves they have spent years practicing and reinforcing. That difference explains why words often feel genuinely convincing in the moment, yet consistently disappointing when measured against time. Language operates entirely in the present. Behavior reveals itself across extended time. If your genuine goal is to understand someone with accuracy, stop listening for emotional intensity and start watching for behavioral consistency. Intensity can be manufactured with practice. Consistency cannot be sustained without it being real. When behavior fails to align with stated words, explanations inevitably appear. These explanations are not random or coincidental. They function as psychological smoke, redirecting attention away from the observable pattern and back toward the comfortable realm of interpretation. They sound entirely reasonable. They appeal to empathy and the natural human desire to extend generosity. They invite you to offer the benefit of the doubt, and once or twice, that generosity may be entirely fair and warranted. But when explanations become the consistent response to consistent behavioral failure, they stop functioning as explanations and begin functioning as signals. Signals that the pattern itself is the message. Repeated explanations offered without genuine behavioral change are essentially admissions without awareness. Someone who is persistently late will always have a credible reason. Someone who habitually avoids responsibility will always have relevant context. Someone who consistently crosses boundaries will always be able to justify their intention. What ultimately matters is not whether the explanation sounds logical and reasonable. What matters is whether the behavior actually changes following the explanation. If it doesn't change, the explanation itself becomes irrelevant. It has already served its real purpose, which was never resolution, but preservation of the existing dynamic. Most people instinctively search for dramatic signals when trying to understand others. Large betrayals, loud arguments, obvious and undeniable dishonesty. But human behavior is far more truthful in its smallest, quietest expressions. Micro-behaviors speak with a soft but remarkably consistent voice. How someone responds when plans unexpectedly shift. How they manage inconvenience when it arrives without warning. How they react when validation doesn't come as quickly or as enthusiastically as they expected. These small, easily overlooked moments reveal emotional maturity, entitlement, patience, and genuine respect more accurately than any carefully composed self-description ever could. People rarely construct deliberate falsehoods through their habits. Habits are built slowly, reinforced unconsciously over years, and they reflect internal priorities rather than external presentation. If someone genuinely values your presence in their life, their behavior will naturally move toward you without requiring negotiation or repeated reminders. If they don't, distance will quietly appear, not announced, not explained, simply present. The challenge isn't that people lack the ability to observe behavior. The deeper challenge is that people struggle to accept what behavioral observation honestly implies. Behavior forces uncomfortable conclusions. Words generously preserve hope. Accepting what behavior consistently communicates means releasing attachment to potential, releasing imagined futures, releasing the version of someone you believed they could become. So, instead of accepting what behavior already shows, many people explain it away. They assume misunderstanding. They wait patiently for clarity that never quite arrives. They seek reassurance through conversation. They search persistently for the right exchange of words that will finally bring someone's actions into alignment with their stated intentions. But that alignment never arrives through conversation alone. It arrives through genuine choice. And choice, real, sustained choice, always shows up in behavior. Understanding behavior does not require confrontation or emotional conflict. You don't need to challenge inconsistencies directly. You don't need to demand explanations or force uncomfortable admissions. You don't need to expose contradictions in front of an audience. You simply need to notice with quiet, steady attention. Noticing is an internal process. It doesn't provoke defensiveness or escalate tension unnecessarily. It allows you to adjust your expectations and calibrate trust without placing yourself in the exhausting position of trying to change another person entirely. This is where emotional intelligence becomes genuinely practical rather than theoretical. You stop reacting to what people declare and start responding thoughtfully to what they consistently demonstrate. You allow behavior to inform where your boundaries belong. You allow patterns to guide how much trust you extend and in which direction. When you begin genuinely prioritizing behavior over words, confusion steadily diminishes. You stop second-guessing your own perceptions. You stop pursuing explanations that were never going to satisfy the deeper question. You stop internalizing inconsistency as though it were a reflection of your worth or your judgment. Instead, you begin to see reality with increasing accuracy. Some people are genuinely consistent. Some people are deeply situational. Some people are entirely reliable, but only when reliability is convenient for them. None of this demands judgment or moral condemnation. It only requires honest awareness. And awareness, once it takes hold, creates a specific kind of freedom. Freedom from false hope. Freedom from the exhausting cycle of emotional whiplash. Freedom from allowing yourself to be persuaded by speech that behavior has never once supported. People reveal far more about themselves in a single, unguarded moment of genuine emotion than in hours of composed, deliberate explanation. This is because emotional reactions are almost never planned in advance. They rise before the mind has the opportunity to filter, polish, or strategically manage the impression being created. In those brief, unguarded moments, anger surfacing unexpectedly, defensiveness rising without invitation, jealousy leaking through a carefully maintained composure, the internal structure of a person becomes visible to anyone paying attention. Emotion is not weakness. Emotion is information. The most useful information you will often encounter about another person arrives not through what they choose to tell you, but through what their nervous system reveals when circumstances unexpectedly pressure it. Most people misread emotional reactions because they evaluate them through a moral framework rather than a psychological one. They categorize reactions as appropriate or inappropriate, rather than asking the genuinely illuminating question, what does this reaction exist to protect? Every significant emotional reaction is a defense of something held internally. When someone becomes disproportionately angry in response to something minor, something they consider genuinely important has been threatened. When someone grows immediately defensive at a gentle question, a fragile component of their self-image has been unexpectedly touched. When someone withdraws emotionally and becomes unreachable, a fear of exposure or loss has been quietly activated beneath the surface. These reactions are never random. They point with remarkable directness toward inner vulnerabilities and unresolved emotional territory. Calm statements are controlled and deliberately composed. Emotional reactions are spontaneous and unfiltered. When someone speaks calmly about their values, they are describing how they have chosen to be perceived. When someone reacts emotionally and unexpectedly, they are revealing what genuinely matters to them, frequently without any awareness that they're doing so. A person who sincerely claims confidence, yet reacts with immediate sharpness to any form of criticism, is quietly protecting an insecurity they may not even consciously acknowledge. A person who consistently states indifference, yet reacts with unmistakable jealousy when attention shifts, is revealing deep attachment. A person who insists on their own honesty, yet responds defensively to straightforward questions, is actively guarding a narrative they fear examining directly. Emotional intensity reliably signals psychological importance. The stronger and more disproportionate the reaction, the closer you are to a genuine psychological core in that person. This does not mean you should deliberately provoke people to observe their responses. Life naturally provides abundant moments of stress, disagreement, and unexpected discomfort. Your only role is to observe with steady, neutral attention how people respond when those inevitable moments arrive on their own. A genuine trigger is never accidental. It functions as a signpost pointing directly toward unresolved internal territory. People are triggered precisely where they remain emotionally unresolved. When a comment, a delay, a boundary, or a simple disagreement produces a reaction that feels dramatically disproportionate to the situation, something much deeper is being activated beneath the surface response. Often, the person reacting is not truly responding to what's happening in the present moment, but to the accumulated weight of an older emotional wound that was never adequately addressed. This is why reactions occasionally feel so far out of proportion to circumstances. The situation itself is small. The emotional charge attached to it is enormous. Understanding this dynamic allows you to observe people's reactions with clarity and genuine compassion, without absorbing their emotional intensity as something personal directed at you. Their reaction, however uncomfortable it may feel in the moment, is fundamentally about them and their unresolved history, not about your worth or your actions. Defensiveness is among the clearest and most consistently reliable emotional signals available. A defensive person is not genuinely protecting an external truth or a factual position. They are protecting how they have come to see themselves internally. When someone cannot comfortably tolerate being questioned, gently corrected, or thoughtfully challenged, even in the mildest possible way, it suggests their sense of identity rests on fragile foundations. They depend on a specific internal narrative to maintain stability, and any perceived threat to that narrative feels genuinely dangerous to their psychological equilibrium. This is why defensiveness frequently surfaces as anger, dismissal, cutting sarcasm, or elaborate over-explanation. The underlying goal is never to resolve the issue being raised. The real goal is to restore internal comfort as quickly as possible. When you observe consistent defensiveness in someone, you are looking directly at the boundary of their self-concept, the place where their confidence ends and their anxiety begins. Anger is frequently misread as strength. In reality, anger most consistently signals the experience of lost control. People become genuinely angry when something they rely on feels threatened. Authority, respect, predictability, dominance, or the consistent flow of validation. Anger attempts to forcefully reassert control over a situation that has begun to feel threatening or unpredictable. This is precisely why anger so often surfaces in direct response to the simple act of setting a boundary. A person who reacts with disproportionate anger to a reasonable boundary is openly revealing entitlement. A person who escalates to rage in response to calm disagreement is revealing deep insecurity beneath a confident exterior. Genuinely calm people do not require intimidation as a tool. People who are truly secure in themselves do not need to overpower others to feel stable. Anger, when observed with neutral awareness, reliably reveals where someone privately feels powerless. Not every significant emotional reaction is expressed loudly or dramatically. Some people simply disappear. they go silent. They become emotionally inaccessible. Withdrawal is most often a survival strategy learned and reinforced early in life. It served as protection against conflict, rejection, or the vulnerability of being fully seen by someone with the capacity to hurt. When emotions feel genuinely overwhelming or psychologically unsafe, the nervous system retreats to distance as its default response. This withdrawal reveals the presence of fear, not indifference. Someone who consistently chooses withdrawal over direct communication is typically avoiding exposure rather than lacking genuine feeling. Once again, the behavior itself carries far more meaning than any explanation offered afterward. The essential skill in reading emotional reactions accurately is cultivating internal distance. Not physical separation, but emotional separation from the intensity of what you're observing. You do not need to argue. You do not need to correct. You do not need to match the emotional temperature of what's happening around you. You simply notice with steady, patient attention. Notice what consistently triggers a reaction. Notice the intensity of that reaction relative to the circumstances that produced it. Notice how quickly it resolves, or whether it resolves at all. Over extended time, emotional patterns become unmistakably visible. Some people react dramatically but recover and return to equilibrium quickly. Some carry resentment quietly for extended periods without ever directly addressing it. Some oscillate between emotional extremes in ways that make consistent trust nearly impossible. These patterns communicate directly about how emotionally safe, stable, and genuinely predictable someone is as a presence in your life. When you develop the capacity to read emotional reactions with accuracy and neutrality, you stop being confused and destabilized by them. You no longer need to ask why someone acted in a way that seemed irrational or disproportionate. You understand what that reaction was working to protect. This understanding restores your agency. You choose how close to stand to someone based on what their patterns actually reveal. You choose what you're willing to share based on real evidence rather than hope. You choose which behaviors you engage with and which you observe from a comfortable distance. Emotions stop governing the entire situation. They become information, quiet, precise, and deeply revealing. And with genuine awareness, you begin to perceive people far more clearly than words and explanations ever permitted. Here is something worth pausing on. In quantum field theory and various schools of consciousness research, the number 444 has been associated with structural stability. The idea that certain patterns, once fully recognized, create a foundation that no longer shifts. If the patterns you're learning to observe are beginning to feel like a stable framework for understanding people, something you can genuinely rely on, consider leaving 444 in the comments. Let this community see who is building that internal stability right now. Most people experience significant discomfort in the presence of silence, instinctively rush to fill it with explanations, lighthearted humor, reassurance, or simple noise. Silence feels like exposure. It removes the protective layer of words and forces attention inward without escape. That discomfort alone reveals something important about how powerful silence truly is as a channel of information. Silence is not emptiness. Silence is data. In the study of human behavior, what remains unspoken frequently matters more than what is carefully articulated. Words can be shaped, filtered, rehearsed, and delivered with strategic timing. Silence, however, carries its own kind of weight, a weight that exposes hesitation, uncertainty, deliberate avoidance, and genuine intention without a single sentence being formed. Speech creates opportunity for performance. Silence removes the script entirely. When conversation pauses or stops, there is no immediate avenue for managing the impression being created. No quick clarifying explanation, no practiced charm, no pre-rehearsed defense. What remains visible is posture, expression, timing, and the quality of presence itself. Some people settle into silence with natural ease and genuine comfort. Others grow visibly anxious, begin to over-explain unprompted, or become restless in ways that communicate volumes. This distinction matters considerably. Comfort with genuine silence frequently signals internal stability and a well-developed relationship with one's own thoughts. Discomfort with silence reveals dependence on external validation or the constant need to manage how one is being perceived by others. People who feel compelled to speak continuously are often engaged in the work of guiding perception, and silence interrupts that effort in ways that cannot be easily recovered from. Silence creates genuine psychological pressure. An unanswered message left unread, a composed pause following a pointed question, a calm, steady presence that offers no immediate commentary or reaction. These moments naturally invite truth to surface from beneath carefully maintained social presentations. People fill silence instinctively and often without realizing what they're revealing in the process. They offer information they were never directly asked to provide. They clarify details that were never called into question. They justify themselves against accusations that were never actually made. What emerges in these unguarded moments of silence filling is frequently more revealing and more honest than anything direct questioning could have produced. This is why highly skilled negotiators, experienced therapists, and the most perceptive observers consistently rely on silence as a primary tool, not to create intimidation or discomfort as an end in itself, but to create the conditions under which honesty naturally rises without being forced. Silence reveals different qualities depending entirely on context and pattern. When someone falls quiet immediately after their behavior is observed or gently named, that silence often signals recognition. Something has been seen that they were hoping would remain invisible. The silence becomes a moment of internal recalibration. When someone retreats into extended silence rather than engaging in honest communication, that withdrawal often signals avoidance, a fear of the vulnerability that genuine directness would require. When someone remains calm, present, and genuinely comfortable in silence, that quality almost always signals emotional regulation and an established sense of internal security. The silence itself is never the complete message. The pattern surrounding it, what precedes it, what follows it, how long it lasts, and what it consistently accompanies is where the real meaning lives. In the dynamics of social interaction, silence frequently redistributes power in ways that most people never consciously recognize. Those who speak with deliberate restraint are often listened to with greater attention and respect. Their words carry particular weight precisely because they are not diluted by constant output. Their presence commands genuine attention because it is not perpetually demanding it through volume or frequency. This is why people who have developed genuine internal confidence do not rush to respond to every provocation or fill every available space in a conversation. They are not driven by anxiety about how silence might be interpreted. They allow moments to unfold at their natural pace. People who feel internally uncertain, by contrast, tend to over-communicate. They repeat themselves unnecessarily. They seek confirmation of points that were already understood. They explain when no explanation was requested or required. Silence, observed with patience and without judgment, consistently reveals where real power resides. Not power exercised over others, but the far more durable power maintained within oneself. One of the most consistently reliable methods for understanding someone's true character has nothing to do with how they treat you directly. It has everything to do with how they treat people who cannot offer them anything in return. This is the territory where human behavior becomes genuinely honest and unfiltered. When people want something from you, approval, connection, opportunity, comfort, or status, they are frequently operating from their most carefully managed version of themselves. They are attentive, agreeable, generous with their time, and patient with your limitations. This version of them feels entirely convincing because it is intentional and sustained by clear motivation. But intention naturally fades when there is nothing meaningful left to gain from maintaining it. How someone treats servers at a restaurant, assistants in a professional setting, subordinates who hold no leverage, strangers who will never be encountered again, former friends who no longer serve any practical purpose. These interactions reveal more about genuine character than any personal exchange between people who share mutual investment. Because in those moments, there is no performance required by circumstance, no social incentive to be gracious, no audience whose opinion carries consequences. Courtesy is frequently a strategy rather than a natural expression of character. Many people are polite by calculation rather than by genuine nature. They understand precisely when politeness creates advantages. They recognize when visible kindness protects their reputation. They know when restraint in the presence of others shields their image from damage. But observe carefully what happens when social leverage disappears entirely. Does respect remain when there is no audience present to notice it? Does patience endure when inconvenience arrives without warning? Does genuine empathy persist when the balance of power is clearly unequal? These moments strip away every incentive to perform. Someone who remains consistently respectful and considerate across vastly different contexts is revealing something real about who they are beneath the social presentation. Someone who is selectively kind based on what each person can offer is revealing calculation. And calculation, while not always malicious in intent, is always honest in what it communicates about a person's underlying orientation toward others. One of the most common and quietly damaging forms of self-deception is the persistent belief that someone is fundamentally different with you than they are with everyone else. People tell themselves and others things like, "They're not really like that with me," or "You don't see the side of them that I experience." And in a narrow, technical sense, there may be some truth in that. People do genuinely adjust their behavior based on specific relationships and the particular dynamics within them. But adjustment is not transformation. If someone regularly dismisses others with contempt, undermines them subtly, manipulates situations to serve their own interests, or consistently avoids any genuine accountability, that pattern exists as part of who they are. It doesn't disappear because of your particular proximity to them. It may not reveal itself immediately in your specific relationship. It may wait patiently for the arrival of comfort, stress, familiarity, or a moment when maintaining the performance simply costs too much. But it will surface. Character does not fundamentally change because of closeness or the intensity of a particular connection. It reveals itself across sufficient time and varied circumstances. Pay close and careful attention to how people speak about those who are not present in the conversation. Do they speak with contempt about former colleagues? Do they casually mock the vulnerabilities of people they once claimed to care about? Do they consistently position themselves as the misunderstood victim in every story they tell about conflict? The way someone narrates other people's behavior is a direct reflection of their internal lens, the framework through which they interpret human relationships and assign meaning to the actions of others. Someone who maintains a consistent pattern of harsh criticism toward absent people is rehearsing, without realizing it, exactly how they will eventually frame you when you are no longer present or useful. Someone who freely violates the privacy of others in conversation will not suddenly develop discretion when it comes to yours. Someone who shares confidences and secrets with casual ease will not abruptly become trustworthy simply because you believe your connection with them is different or more significant. Speech about others is not merely conversation. It is a preview of future behavior. Anyone can demonstrate respect in an upward direction. People are reliably polite to authority. They are accommodating and agreeable to those who hold status. They are careful and considerate with people who have the capacity to affect their outcomes in meaningful ways. This tells you almost nothing useful about genuine character. What carries real information is the direction in which respect flows downward. How someone treats people they have no reason to fear. How they conduct themselves when they hold a clear advantage in a situation. How they use whatever power they currently possess reveals their ethical baseline with remarkable consistency. A person who uses power with gentleness and restraint is revealing genuine self-control. A person who uses power as an instrument of domination is revealing the insecurity that dominance is designed to conceal. You don't need to speculate about how someone might behave toward you differently in some future scenario. You can observe with complete accuracy how they already treat others when the dynamic is reversed, and there is nothing to lose by being unkind. When people choose to ignore these behavioral signals, it is rarely because they are genuinely unable to see them. It is almost always because acknowledging what they see would require a painful emotional adjustment. Releasing admiration that felt meaningful. Releasing hope that had been carefully cultivated. Releasing the deeply appealing idea that this particular person represents an exception to the patterns they display everywhere else. So the mind steps in with explanations. It provides context that softens the edges. It rationalizes. They were under unusual stress. They didn't intend it to land that way. It was an unusually difficult day for them. Once again, explanation replaces honest observation. Isolated moments of poor behavior can genuinely be forgiven with reasonable justification. Repeated patterns operating across time and varied contexts cannot be explained away without significant cost to your own clarity and eventual well-being. The most accurate and reliable method for understanding who someone genuinely is involves watching them consistently across a wide range of situations and circumstances. Watch them when they are being praised and affirmed by others. Watch them when they are being challenged or questioned. Watch them when they are being ignored or receiving less attention than they feel they deserve. Watch them when they hold clear advantage and control over a situation. Consistency across these varied contexts signals genuine integrity. The presence of a stable internal character that doesn't shift dramatically based on what the environment demands. Inconsistency across contexts signals role-based behavior. The performance of different versions of self depending on what each particular situation appears to reward. This awareness doesn't require you to render judgment or assign moral evaluation. It simply means calibrating your expectations, your level of trust, and the degree of emotional investment you extend based on what you have actually observed rather than what you hope might eventually emerge. Understanding how people treat others requires no bitterness and generates none in those who apply it wisely. It requires clarity, the willingness to see what is genuinely present without the distortion of wishful thinking. You can recognize someone's consistent limitations without building resentment toward them. You can honestly acknowledge a behavioral pattern without reducing the entire human being to that pattern. Most people act from deeply ingrained conditioning rather than conscious, malicious intent. They are repeating responses that developed from fear, from early relational wounds, from environments that shaped them before they had any awareness or choice in the matter. Compassion does not require self-blindness in response to this reality. You can be genuinely kind without being naive about what the evidence shows. You can hold understanding without placing yourself repeatedly in the path of predictable harm. You can recognize patterns with complete accuracy without making it your mission to alter or fix them. Insecurity is one of the few genuine psychological forces that cannot remain concealed for extended periods, regardless of how skilled the individual is at managing impressions. People can rehearse confidence with considerable effectiveness. They can adopt authority, project charm, and maintain composure in carefully controlled situations. But insecurity inevitably leaks. It surfaces through tone, through timing, through the need to control, through persistent comparison, and through the quality of reaction when something disrupts the fragile equilibrium they've constructed. It appears not in what people say when circumstances are favorable and comfortable, but in how they behave when their sense of worth feels quietly under threat. Understanding insecurity is essential to reading people accurately because insecure behavior is consistently misread as confidence, strength, or even effective leadership. In reality, insecurity is frequently noisy, and once you know what the noise actually sounds like, you cannot unhear it. Genuine confidence is calm in a way that requires no announcement. It does not rush to prove itself. It does not require constant external agreement to feel stable. Confident people are comfortable with silence, with disagreement, and with the natural delays that life consistently produces. They do not interpret difference of opinion as personal threat. Insecure people, by contrast, experience the world as fundamentally unstable. Their sense of worth depends heavily on the continuous flow of external validation, and anything that disrupts that flow feels genuinely threatening to their stability. This is why insecurity so frequently presents itself as intensity, loud opinions delivered with rigid certainty, unnecessary dominance asserted in situations that don't require it. These are not signs of inner strength. They are sustained attempts to stabilize a self-image that has never found secure footing from within. One of the most consistently visible signs of deeply rooted insecurity is the compulsive need to control. Insecure people attempt to manage outcomes, direct other people's behavior, and control the narratives that surround them. They struggle profoundly with genuine uncertainty and rely on control as the primary mechanism for managing the anxiety that uncertainty produces. This can appear as micromanaging the details of conversations, persistently correcting minor points that carry no real significance, requiring the final word in exchanges, or redirecting others unnecessarily when no redirection was requested. The underlying motivation is never efficiency or genuine helpfulness. The underlying motivation is reassurance, the temporary relief of feeling that something in the environment is being successfully managed. When someone feels genuinely secure internally, they do not require constant external control. They trust their own capacity to adapt and respond to whatever arrives. Control, when it functions as a persistent pattern rather than an occasional preference, reliably reveals fear rather than authority. Genuinely secure people do not live in a state of persistent comparison with others. They may notice differences in achievement or recognition, but those differences do not diminish their own sense of worth or activate anxiety. Insecure people, however, exist in a near constant state of comparative measurement. They track who receives recognition and how much. They monitor status with careful attention. They feel genuinely threatened by success that belongs to someone else, particularly when that success is visible to people whose opinions they value. This persistent comparison leaks through subtle but recognizable behaviors, quietly minimizing the achievements of others in conversation, steering discussion back toward their own contributions and experiences, expressing dismissal or mockery toward things they privately and secretly envy. These behaviors operate largely below the level of conscious awareness. They are protective reactions developed over time, not deliberate strategies. Insecurity transforms other people's success into an uncomfortable mirror, and not everyone is willing to look honestly at what that mirror reflects. Pressure does what comfort can never accomplish. It removes rehearsal. It dismantles performance with quiet efficiency. It exposes genuine priorities in ways that smooth circumstances never could. When life remains comfortable and predictable, people can sustain almost any image with relative ease. They can present themselves as patient, generous, composed, and deeply considerate of others. But when real pressure arrives, through conflict, loss, uncertainty, or the collision of expectations with reality, the nervous system takes over its primary function. And in that moment, behavior becomes genuinely honest in ways that no amount of careful self-presentation can disguise. Pressure does not create character. It reveals what was always present beneath the managed exterior. This is why observing people during moments of genuine strain provides more accurate information about who they actually are than extended periods of comfortable, pleasant interaction ever could. Under significant pressure, the brain naturally shifts from deliberate reflection toward instinctive reaction. There is less cognitive capacity available for managing impressions, less energy available for filtering responses before they emerge. The mind defaults to what it has practiced most thoroughly over time: habit, instinct, deeply embedded conditioning. Some people become focused, clear, and decisively effective under pressure. Some become defensive and rigidly resistant to input. Some withdraw entirely. Some reach for control as a way of managing the anxiety that pressure produces. These responses are not choices made consciously in the moment. They are learned patterns operating automatically. And because they are learned through years of repetition, they reliably repeat whenever similar pressure arrives. Emotional maturity is never meaningfully measured by how someone conducts themselves when circumstances are easy and comfortable. It is measured entirely by how they respond when expectations collapse and reality fails to cooperate with their preferences. Do they assume genuine responsibility or immediately deflect blame onto available external targets? Do they communicate honestly or withdraw behind silence and avoidance? Do they regulate their own emotional state or distribute it throughout the environment by making their distress everyone else's problem? People who have developed genuine emotional maturity experience stress internally and manage it without requiring others to carry the weight of it. People who have not yet developed that capacity externalize stress. They project it onto those around them, generate unnecessary conflict, or demand reassurance that no one is positioned to sustainably provide. Stress reveals with precision whether someone can hold discomfort within themselves without handing it to everyone in their immediate environment. As you integrate everything shared throughout this audiobook, something important deserves your attention. In various traditions of awareness and consciousness study, the number 888 has long been associated with the completion of a significant internal cycle, the closing of one chapter of understanding and the opening of something more expansive and clear. If working through these ideas has produced a genuine shift in how you intend to observe, engage with, and respond to the people in your life, if something has genuinely completed and something new is beginning, consider leaving 888 in the comments below. Let this community witness the moment a real cycle turned for you. Most people assume they consistently misjudge others because they lack sufficient information. If only more had been explained, if only better questions had been asked, if only the circumstances had been different. But the real and deeper reason people misjudge others is not insufficient information. It is distortion. Human perception is never genuinely neutral. It is continuously filtered through emotion, memory, hope, fear, and the accumulated weight of personal values and past experience. And until those filters are honestly examined and understood, you will continue perceiving people not as they genuinely are, but as your mind has quietly and persistently reshaped them to be. Projection is among the most powerful and consistently influential of all perceptual distortions. It occurs when you unconsciously assume that others think, feel, and value things in essentially the same way you do. You interpret their actions through your own internal framework rather than through any honest attempt to understand theirs. If honesty is a core value for you, you assume it operates as a core value for them. If loyalty defines how you show up in relationships, you expect it to define how they show up as well. If direct communication feels natural and respectful to you, you believe it feels equally natural to them. This feels entirely reasonable. It feels profoundly human. And it is, without question, among the fastest and most reliable pathways to consistent misjudgment. Projection is comforting because it creates the reassuring impression that the world operates on universally shared rules and values. But human behavior does not follow a single moral framework. It follows individual conditioning shaped by entirely different histories, fears, and experiences. People are not wrong for being different from you, but they become genuinely difficult to navigate accurately when you continue assuming a similarity that the evidence consistently contradicts. Hope fills the gaps that observation leaves open with generous possibility. It interprets ambiguity in the most favorable available direction. It delays conclusions that would require uncomfortable action. It converts clear patterns into isolated exceptions that deserve another chance. Hope says they didn't truly mean it that way. They'll eventually change. This time, the outcome will be different. Hope is not foolish. It is emotional investment seeking justification. When you genuinely want a relationship, an outcome, or a particular version of someone to exist and persist, your perception bends naturally toward that desire. Behavior that contradicts the desired reality gets minimized. Words that appear to support it get amplified beyond what the evidence warrants. Because hope feels positive and generous, people rarely subject it to honest scrutiny. They mistake it for kindness, for emotional depth, for the admirable refusal to give up on people prematurely. In reality, hope functioning as a perceptual lens distorts with the same reliability as fear. It simply distorts in a direction that feels more comfortable for longer. Clarity, genuine, sustained, undefended clarity about who people are and what their behavior consistently communicates, is not a gift distributed unevenly at birth to the naturally perceptive. It is a discipline. A practiced discipline of observing without rushing to fill gaps with comfortable interpretation. Of noticing what is actually present without immediately moving to rescue what that noticing implies. Of allowing reality to be precisely what the evidence shows it to be, even when that reality disappoints expectations that were never grounded in honest observation to begin with. When you gradually release projection, hope-based distortion, and the bias created by emotional attachment, something stabilizes within you in a way that feels permanent rather than temporary. You stop misjudging people with painful regularity, not because people suddenly become simpler or more transparent, but because your perception of them becomes genuinely accurate for the first time. And this is where everything shared throughout this audiobook arrives at its most essential and practical point. The calm observer, the person who has developed the capacity to watch without immediately reacting, to notice without immediately judging, to understand without the constant need to intervene, does not hold power over others. They hold something far more durable and valuable. They hold power over their own responses. They hold the capacity to choose engagement deliberately rather than stumbling into it reactively. They hold the rare ability to remain grounded and clear when everything in the surrounding environment is moving toward confusion and escalation. The journey you've undertaken through these ideas is not about becoming harder or more guarded or more distant from the people in your life. It is about becoming more genuinely present to what is actually happening rather than to what you were hoping would happen. It is about engaging with people as they actually are rather than as the versions your projection, hope, and emotional investment quietly constructed. The observers who navigate human relationships with the greatest skill and the greatest peace are not the ones who trust least or care least. They are the ones who see most clearly and who have learned that seeing clearly is itself a form of profound respect for others and for themselves. What you carry forward from here may not transform overnight into perfect perceptual clarity. That is not how genuine growth in awareness operates. But with patient, consistent practice, returning to these principles when confusion arrives, applying behavioral observation when words feel more convincing than they should, allowing silence to reveal what speech attempts to conceal, something genuinely shifts. Gradually, then unmistakably, the people in your life begin to make a different kind of sense, not because they changed, because you began to see them as they always were. And that quality of seeing, calm, grounded, free from the distortion of hope or fear, or the need to be right about who someone is, may be among the most quietly powerful capacities a human being can develop. At Elite Success Audiobooks, this is the understanding we return to in everything we create. Not the promise of instant transformation, but the steady accumulation of insight that, over time, changes how you move through the world entirely. If this material has begun that process for you, you are already further along than most people will ever choose to travel. And that, quietly and without dramatic announcement, changes everything about what becomes possible for you from here. There is a dimension of human behavior that most people never think to examine carefully, not because it is hidden in any complicated or technical sense, but because it operates so close to the surface of everyday interaction that it blends seamlessly into the background of ordinary life. It is the dimension of consistency. Not consistency in the dramatic, obvious sense of someone keeping a major promise or honoring a significant commitment, but consistency in the smallest, most unremarkable moments of daily existence. The moments no one thinks are being observed. The moments that carry no social weight and no apparent consequence. These are the moments that reveal everything. Most people invest enormous energy in evaluating others during significant events. They pay close attention during moments of conflict or celebration, during periods of visible stress or obvious success. They form conclusions based on how someone behaved during a crisis, how they responded to a major disappointment, how they showed up during a pivotal moment in the relationship. And while those observations carry genuine value, they represent only a fraction of the behavioral data available to anyone paying careful, patient attention. The most honest portrait of who someone is emerges not from the extraordinary moments, but from the accumulated weight of the ordinary ones. How someone speaks to you when nothing particular is happening. How they respond to small inconveniences that no one else will ever know about. How they treat the people and things in their environment when there is absolutely no social incentive to treat them well. These moments, precisely because they feel insignificant, are where the performance finally rests. And when the performance rests, the person beneath it becomes fully visible. Consider for a moment the difference between someone who is kind when kindness is noticed, and someone who is kind when kindness will never be acknowledged. Consider the difference between someone who is honest when honesty is easy, and someone who chooses honesty when a comfortable lie would serve them better, and no one would ever know the difference. These distinctions are not minor. They are the entire foundation of what genuine character actually means in practical terms. Character is not what someone does when the stakes are high and the audience is present. Character is what someone consistently does when the stakes feel low and no one is watching. And once you begin observing people through that particular lens, you will find that the picture that emerges is consistently more accurate and more useful than anything you could have assembled from their words, their self-descriptions, or their behavior during the moments they knew were significant. There is something else worth understanding about consistency that most people overlook entirely. Consistency is not merely about repetition. It is about the relationship between what someone values internally and how that internal value system expresses itself externally across time. People are not always consciously aware of what they genuinely value. They have ideas about what they value. stories they tell themselves and others about their priorities and their principles. But what they actually value reveals itself not through those stories, but through where they consistently invest their attention, their energy, and their time when no one is constructing a narrative about it. Someone who claims to value deep connection, but consistently chooses superficial interaction when depth becomes available, is showing you their actual values, not the values they have assigned themselves in their self-concept. Someone who insists that honesty is their highest principle, but consistently chooses the comfortable version of truth when the full truth would cost them something, is showing you what genuinely sits at the center of their value system. This is not judgment. This is the simple, patient work of allowing behavior across time to tell the truth that self-description was never designed to tell. The concept of baseline behavior is one of the most practically useful frameworks you can develop for understanding people accurately. Every person has a behavioral baseline, a consistent default mode of operating that persists across situations, moods, and circumstances. This baseline is not what someone shows you on their best day or their worst day. It is what they show you on an ordinary Tuesday when nothing particularly significant is happening, and there is no reason to perform in any particular direction. Getting access to someone's genuine baseline requires patience and sustained observation over time. It cannot be assessed from a single conversation or even a series of conversations. It requires watching someone across enough varied circumstances that the patterns beneath the situational adjustments become unmistakably clear. Once you have a genuine read on someone's behavioral baseline, you possess something extraordinary, a reliable reference point against which you can calibrate every subsequent interaction. You know what their ordinary looks like, which means you also know with quiet precision when something has shifted and why that shift carries information worth attending to. Deviation from baseline is one of the most revealing signals in the entire landscape of human behavior. When someone who is ordinarily warm and engaged becomes suddenly distant and guarded, that deviation communicates something real, something that no explanation offered afterward will communicate with equal honesty. When someone who is typically measured and composed begins reacting with disproportionate intensity to minor provocations, that shift reveals the presence of something beneath the surface that the baseline was previously concealing. When someone who has been consistently reliable suddenly becomes elusive and difficult to reach, that change in pattern carries information that their words in that moment are unlikely to match. Learning to track deviation from baseline is not about becoming suspicious or treating every behavioral shift as a reason for alarm. It is about developing a calibrated sensitivity to the difference between natural variation, the ordinary fluctuations that every human being experiences, and meaningful deviation that signals something worth understanding more fully. There is a particular quality of attention that the most perceptive observers of human behavior consistently develop, and it is worth examining directly because it differs significantly from the kind of attention most people bring to their interactions with others. Most people bring reactive attention to their relationships. They are attending to what is happening in the immediate moment, the content of what is being said, the emotional tone of the current exchange, the surface-level dynamics of the present interaction. This kind of attention is not without value, but it is inherently limited because it operates entirely within the frame of the present moment, and therefore cannot perceive the patterns that only become visible across time. The kind of attention that genuinely illuminates human behavior is longitudinal attention, the patient, consistent practice of observing the same person across many different moments, many different contexts, and many different emotional states, and then allowing the patterns that emerge across all of those observations to speak louder than any single moment within them. Developing longitudinal attention requires something that feels genuinely counterintuitive in a culture that consistently rewards speed and immediate assessment. It requires the willingness to withhold conclusion, to remain in a state of active observation without rushing toward the comfort of a definitive judgment. Most people find this deeply uncomfortable. The mind naturally seeks resolution. It wants to know where someone stands, what they represent, whether they can be trusted, how they should be categorized. These are not irrational desires. They reflect the genuine human need for predictability and psychological safety. But when the desire for resolution is allowed to drive perception prematurely, it consistently produces the misjudgments that leave people feeling repeatedly surprised and confused by others. The observer who has learned to remain genuinely open, who can sustain patient, curious attention without collapsing into premature conclusion, will ultimately develop a picture of who someone is that is far more accurate and far more useful than anything assembled through speed and the comfort of early certainty. Before continuing, take a moment to sit with what's already forming in your understanding. In the study of consciousness and quantum awareness, the number 333 has been associated with the activation of aligned perception, the moment when multiple streams of observation begin, converging into a single, coherent picture of reality. If what you're building through this material feels like different pieces of understanding beginning to align into something unified and clear, consider leaving 333 in the comments. Let this community see who is arriving at that moment of convergence right now. There is a dimension of human interaction that receives far less attention than it deserves, partly because it operates in a register that most people have been conditioned to overlook, and partly because its signals are subtle enough that they require a specific quality of attention to perceive clearly. That dimension is the space between words, the territory of implication, omission, and the things that are consistently not said. Every communicator makes choices about what to include and what to leave out. Those choices are never entirely random. They reflect priorities, fears, self-protective instincts, and the particular version of reality the speaker is working to establish in the listener's mind. Learning to attend to what is consistently absent from someone's communication, what topics they reliably avoid, what questions they consistently deflect, what aspects of their experience they never voluntarily offer, provides a layer of understanding that attends only to explicit content will always miss. Consider the person who, in every conversation about their past, speaks extensively about their accomplishments and rarely, if ever, acknowledges their failures or the ways their own choices contributed to difficult outcomes. The consistent absence of self-reflection in their narrative is not a minor detail. It reveals something fundamental about how they relate to accountability, to growth, and to the gap between the image they maintain and the reality they inhabit. Consider the person who readily shares criticism of others, but deflects with practiced ease every time the conversation turns toward anything that might require honest self-examination. The pattern of what they consistently avoid is at least as informative as the pattern of what they readily offer. Omission is a form of communication, and learning to hear it requires developing sensitivity to the shape of what's not there alongside the shape of what is. The way people relate to their own history is among the richest sources of behavioral information available to a patient observer. How someone narrates their past, the characters they populate it with, the roles they assign, the lessons they claim to have drawn from difficult experiences, the way they position themselves within the stories they tell, reveals with striking clarity the internal framework through which they currently interpret and navigate their relationships. Someone who consistently positions themselves as the innocent party in every significant conflict in their history is not simply sharing factual recollection. They are revealing an orientation toward accountability that will operate with perfect consistency in your relationship with them as well. Someone who speaks about past relationships, professional, personal, or otherwise, with a tone of contempt or dismissal for everyone involved except themselves, is not describing a particularly unfortunate series of circumstances. They are showing you the lens through which they will eventually view your shared history once the current chapter has run its course. This is not cynicism. It is pattern recognition applied with enough honesty to actually be useful. Most people listen to others' stories about their past and receive them primarily as content, as interesting or unfortunate sequences of events that happened to someone before they knew them. The more perceptive approach treats those stories not as historical accounts, but as behavioral previews. The patterns someone has established in navigating their past relationships and circumstances do not evaporate when a new relationship begins. They travel with the person into every new context, waiting for the right combination of familiarity, stress, or diminished incentive to perform before they reassert themselves with full clarity. This is not a pessimistic view of human nature. It is simply an accurate one. People do change and grow, genuinely, meaningfully, in ways that alter their behavioral patterns over time. But that change is always visible in behavior before it is announced in words, and it is always sustained across time and varied circumstances before it can be trusted as genuine rather than temporary. There is a specific quality that consistently distinguishes people who navigate relationships with genuine wisdom and emotional health from those who find themselves repeatedly exhausted, surprised, and disappointed by the people in their lives. That quality is not intelligence, although intelligence certainly plays a supporting role. It is not emotional sensitivity, although the capacity to perceive emotional nuance is deeply valuable. The distinguishing quality is the capacity to hold two things simultaneously without requiring them to collapse into one. To hold genuine care for someone alongside honest perception of their limitations. To hold warmth and openness alongside the clear-eyed awareness of what the evidence actually shows. To hold the desire for a relationship to be what you hope it could be, alongside the willingness to see it as it actually is. Most people find this particular kind of simultaneous holding genuinely difficult. The mind tends toward resolution and simplification. It wants people to be either trustworthy or untrustworthy, either caring or indifferent, either safe or dangerous. The reality of human beings is almost always more complex and more nuanced than those binary categories can contain. And the people who navigate that complexity most effectively are those who have developed the capacity to remain in the nuance without the discomfort of unresolved perception forcing them toward premature simplification. Emotional intelligence, in its most practically useful form, is not primarily about understanding or managing your own emotions, although that is certainly one essential component of it. In its most advanced and genuinely useful expression, emotional intelligence is about the capacity to remain in accurate contact with the emotional reality of a situation without being governed by it. It is the ability to perceive what is emotionally present in yourself, in others, in the relational space between you, while maintaining enough internal separation from that perception to respond from choice rather than from reaction. This capacity does not develop automatically or quickly. It develops through the consistent, patient practice of noticing your own emotional responses and asking, with honest curiosity, what those responses reveal about your own internal framework, rather than immediately accepting them as accurate readings of external reality. Every time you feel unexpectedly hurt by something someone did, there is information available not only about their behavior, but about the expectation you were holding that their behavior failed to meet. Every time you feel disproportionately relieved by someone's approval, there is information about the degree to which that approval was carrying weight it was never designed to sustain. This inward attention does not diminish your capacity to read others accurately. It dramatically enhances it. There is something that happens between people that almost no one talks about directly, yet nearly everyone has experienced in a way that left a lasting impression. It is the moment when you are in the presence of someone and something feels subtly but unmistakably off. Not because of anything they said, not because of any single behavior you could point to with confidence, but because of an accumulated quality of interaction that your nervous system registered before your conscious mind had the language to name it. Most people dismiss this experience. They tell themselves they are being oversensitive, that they are projecting, that they don't have enough evidence to justify what they're feeling. And in doing so, they override one of the most sophisticated and reliable instruments available to any human observer: the body's accumulated wisdom about the relational environment it is navigating. The nervous system is not a passive receiver of information. It is an active, continuously operating processing system that has been accumulating data about human behavior and relational safety since the earliest moments of your existence. Long before you had the cognitive capacity to analyze behavior consciously, your nervous system was learning to recognize patterns of safety and threat, patterns of genuine care and performative care, patterns of consistency and manipulation. That accumulated learning does not disappear when you develop the capacity for conscious analysis. It continues operating beneath the level of deliberate thought, processing enormous quantities of subtle behavioral information and producing responses, sensations of ease or discomfort, openness or guardedness, trust or caution, that frequently arrive well ahead of any conscious justification for them. Learning to respect and work with this dimension of perception rather than habitually overriding it is one of the most significant developments available to anyone genuinely committed to reading people with accuracy. This does not mean treating every uncomfortable feeling as infallible truth about another person. Uncomfortable feelings can arise from your own unresolved history, from projection, from the simple unfamiliarity of encountering someone whose way of being in the world differs substantially from your own. The skill is not blind trust in every internal response. The skill is developing the capacity to distinguish between responses that originate in your own unexamined material and responses that are genuinely tracking something real in the relational environment. And that distinction, like every other dimension of perceptual accuracy, develops through patient, honest practice over time. One of the most practically useful ways to develop this distinction is to notice the quality of your nervous system's response to someone across repeated interactions rather than drawing conclusions from single encounters. A single conversation that produces discomfort could reflect almost anything: your own state in that moment, the particular circumstances surrounding the interaction, simple misalignment of communication styles that has nothing to do with character. But a consistent pattern of the same quality of response across many different interactions in many different circumstances, when your own state varies considerably, that consistency is worth taking seriously. The body is not telling stories for entertainment. It is reporting patterns that the conscious mind has not yet assembled into a coherent picture. And when you begin to honor that reporting with honest, curious attention rather than automatic dismissal, you will find that your perceptual accuracy improves in ways that feel almost uncanny until you understand the mechanism behind them. There is a related dimension of perception that deserves equal attention and that operates through a slightly different channel. It is the quality of energy that surrounds your interactions with specific people over time, not in any mystical or imprecise sense, but in the very concrete and measurable sense of how you consistently feel during and after time spent with them. Some people leave you feeling more energized, more clear, more genuinely yourself than you were before the interaction. Others consistently leave you feeling drained, confused, vaguely unsettled, or subtly diminished in ways that are difficult to articulate precisely. These are not arbitrary or random experiences. They are the accumulated result of how someone's behavioral patterns interact with your own nervous system across time. And while the immediate content of individual interactions may vary considerably, the consistent quality of how you feel in someone's presence and aftermath is one of the most honest and reliable pieces of behavioral information available to you. People who consistently leave others feeling drained or diminished are not always doing so through obviously harmful behavior. In many cases, the most consistently depleting people are those whose primary relational orientation, however unconsciously held, involves extracting something from their interactions rather than contributing to them. They may be extracting validation, emotional energy, attention, reassurance, or simply the comfort of having someone absorb the weight of their unprocessed internal material. This extraction is rarely malicious. It is most often the automatic expression of unmet internal needs operating without self-awareness. But its impact on the people in the environment of such a person is consistent and cumulative, regardless of intention. And once you begin noticing the pattern of how specific people leave you feeling across many varied interactions, you possess information about the nature of the relational dynamic that no amount of analyzing their explicit behavior will provide with equal clarity. This awareness invites a form of honest self-inquiry that is worth practicing with genuine rigor. When you consistently feel drained or diminished in someone's presence, the first and most honest question is not, "What are they doing to me?" but, "What is happening between us? And what, if anything, am I contributing to that dynamic through my own patterns?" Sometimes the depletion originates almost entirely from the other person's extractive orientation. But sometimes it originates substantially from your own tendency to overgive, to absorb more than your share of relational responsibility, to prioritize the other person's comfort at the consistent expense of your own boundaries and energy. Honest self-inquiry does not assign blame in either direction. It seeks accurate understanding of the dynamic, because accurate understanding is the only foundation from which genuinely effective and sustainable adjustment becomes possible. In the landscape of human relationships, there is a particular dynamic that causes more confusion, more persistent disappointment, and more unnecessary self-doubt than almost any other. It is the dynamic created by intermittent reinforcement, the pattern in which positive experiences and negative experiences alternate in ways that are unpredictable enough to keep the nervous system in a continuous state of heightened attention and hope. Intermittent reinforcement is not a strategy that most people consciously employ. It is most often simply the natural expression of someone whose behavior is genuinely inconsistent, whose warmth and care are real but unreliable, whose availability is genuine but unpredictable, whose kindness is authentic but not sustained by any stable internal foundation. The effect on the people in relationship with such a person is, regardless of intention, profound and often deeply destabilizing. The nervous system responds to unpredictable reward with a specific pattern of activation that is significantly more intense and more persistent than its response to consistent reward. When you never know whether an interaction with someone will produce warmth or coldness, connection or distance, affirmation or dismissal, your nervous system remains in a state of continuous alert, scanning for signals, attempting to predict outcomes, investing disproportionate attention and energy into decoding the person's current state and what it might mean for your next interaction with them. This heightened investment can easily be mistaken for the depth of genuine connection. It feels intense. It feels significant. It occupies enormous cognitive and emotional real estate. But what it actually reflects is not the depth of the relationship. It reflects the nervous system's response to unpredictability, a response that can attach itself to almost any person who triggers it, regardless of whether that person is genuinely good for you or genuinely capable of providing what you need. Recognizing intermittent reinforcement patterns in your own relational experiences requires a particular quality of honest self-observation that is not always comfortable to sustain. It requires asking, with genuine curiosity rather than judgment, whether the intensity of your investment in a specific relationship is proportional to the consistent quality of what that relationship actually provides, or whether it is being amplified substantially by the very unpredictability that makes the relationship difficult. This distinction matters enormously for the quality of decisions you make about where to invest your energy, your trust, and your emotional availability. Relationships that feel intensely significant because of their consistent depth and mutual nourishment are worth every degree of investment they receive. Relationships that feel intensely significant primarily because of their unpredictability and the anxiety that unpredictability generates are communicating something very different, something that deserves honest attention rather than the rationalization that intensity alone is evidence of value. As you sit with these ideas, consider something that the most self-aware and emotionally grounded people carry as a quiet practice in their daily lives. In various traditions of mindful awareness and conscious observation, the number 222 has been associated with the recognition of balance. Specifically, the balance between honest perception and compassionate engagement, between clear seeing and warm connection. If what you're building through this material feels like that particular balance beginning to take shape within you, the sense that clarity and compassion are not in competition, but are actually the same capacity expressed in two directions, consider leaving 222 in the comments. Let this community witness who is arriving at that balance today. The question of trust, when to extend it, how much to extend, and on what basis to extend it, is one of the most consequential and least clearly understood questions in the practical navigation of human relationships. Most people operate with one of two approaches to trust, both of which create predictable and avoidable problems. The first approach is what might be called ambient trust, the default extension of trust to everyone until a specific, significant reason to withdraw it appears. This approach is generous and relationally open, but it consistently places people in the position of discovering trustworthiness only after they have already extended investment that the relationship's actual foundations could not support. The second approach is conditional distrust, the default withholding of trust until sufficient evidence has accumulated to justify its extension. This approach protects against certain kinds of disappointment, but it simultaneously closes off the genuine openness that authentic connection requires, and frequently communicates a guardedness that makes the kind of honest, mutual vulnerability that trust actually develops through nearly impossible to establish. The approach that genuinely effective relational navigators develop over time is neither of these. It is calibrated trust, the practice of extending trust incrementally in proportion to the behavioral evidence that has actually accumulated, while remaining genuinely open to both directions of revision as additional evidence arrives. Calibrated trust does not require cynicism or guardedness as its foundation. It requires patience and honest attention. It means beginning relationships with genuine openness while withholding the depth of investment that only sustained behavioral evidence can actually justify. It means allowing trust to build through the accumulation of consistent, repeated demonstrations of reliability and care, rather than through the intensity of early impressions or the warmth of stated intentions. And it means being genuinely willing to revise trust upward when behavior earns it, not only to protect against misplaced trust, but to fully honor the people who genuinely deserve the depth of investment their consistent behavior has earned. One of the clearest indicators that trust is being calibrated accurately, rather than driven by hope or anxiety, is the quality of your own internal state within the relationship. When trust is well calibrated, when the depth of your investment is genuinely proportional to the behavioral evidence that supports it, there is a particular quality of ease and clarity that characterizes your experience of the relationship. Not the absence of complexity or challenge, because all genuine relationships involve both, but an underlying sense of groundedness, of knowing where you stand and why, of being able to engage fully without the persistent background hum of unresolved uncertainty about whether the foundation beneath you is actually solid. When trust is poorly calibrated, either extended far beyond what the evidence supports or withheld well beyond what the evidence warrants, that ease and clarity are replaced by a specific quality of internal tension that, once you learn to recognize it, becomes a reliable signal that recalibration is needed. The capacity to recalibrate trust without drama, without excessive self-criticism for having misjudged, and without punishing the other person for failing to live up to an investment they were never in a position to sustain. This capacity is one of the most sophisticated and most valuable skills available in the navigation of human relationships. Most people experience the need to recalibrate trust as a form of failure or loss. They feel foolish for having trusted too much, or guilty for having withheld trust from someone who deserved it, or angry at the person whose behavior required the recalibration. None of these responses are irrational. They are entirely understandable human responses to experiences that carry real emotional weight. But they are also responses that, when they become habitual, consistently interfere with the clean, clear-eyed recalibration that serves your actual well-being and relational health most effectively. Recalibrating trust is not a failure. It is the system working exactly as it should, responding to new behavioral evidence with the kind of honest adjustment that only genuine attention and genuine honesty make possible. At Elite Success Audiobooks, we understand that the ideas explored throughout this material do not become fully integrated simply through the act of encountering them. Integration happens through the patient, consistent practice of returning to these principles in the actual moments of your daily life, in the conversations that challenge your perceptions, in the relationships that test your capacity for honest observation, in the internal moments when the familiar pull toward comfortable illusion is competing with the quieter but more durable pull toward clarity. Every time you choose observation over assumption in one of those moments, something strengthens within you. Every time you allow behavioral evidence to speak more loudly than hopeful interpretation, your perceptual accuracy deepens in ways that accumulate into something genuinely transformative over time. This is not a process with a clear finish line. It is a direction of development that, once genuinely established, continues producing returns indefinitely in the quality of your relationships, the quality of your decisions, and the quiet, unshakable steadiness with which you move through a world that is always, in one way or another, showing you exactly who it is. What you carry forward from everything built across these pages is not a set of techniques to be applied mechanically to the people in your life. It is a quality of attention, patient, honest, compassionate, and clear, that will continue revealing what it needs to reveal as long as you are willing to sustain it. The people in your life will continue to show you who they are through every interaction, every silence, every small and unremarkable moment of ordinary behavior. Your only task, and it is both simpler and more demanding than any technique, is to keep watching, to keep noticing, to keep allowing what is genuinely present to register without the distortion of what you were hoping to find, and to keep trusting that clarity, however quietly and gradually it arrives, is always worth the patience it requires.